What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Juice. This is Brandon Keckler and Sayre Bedinger. We are on episode 3. No, episode 4. We're 4 deep into the brand new Your Favorite Broncos podcast. Your favorite podcast, hopefully, of your life. Soon to be the greatest podcast in the world. Number 1 on all the charts. But we're climbing. We're taking in these small victories. And right now, today, we have our very first special guest, which is Jeff Essary from Mile High Report. So, Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Appreciate it, guys. I feel honored, man. First guest on the show. This is exciting. It's a little intimidating. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, you gotta raise the bar.
I'll either set the bar really low for all your other guests that they can outshine me, or somewhere in between. We'll figure it out.
Exactly. Right. Keep it low. Don't intimidate the rest of them, because then we'll no one's gonna want to jump on and join the podcast after you.
That's right. We're shooting really high with this one, Jeff. It's crazy how we first met, because we didn't know each other too well. I mean, we talked to each other on Twitter and everything. We bond over the Broncos, obviously, but we ended up meeting up in Mobile, Alabama, of all places, at the Senior Bowl back in January. And it's crazy. It's just crazy how quickly, like, you and me and Carl formed that bond together. And we just had so much fun down there. We ate at PF Chang's together. We've shared moments together, Jeff.
Yeah, man, it's so cool how, and if you're listening to this and you've never been down to the Senior Bowl and you've been thinking about it or whatever, if you're a writer, or you're able to get down there and get credentialed, it is so cool, because it just brings this community, this football world together. And for this last time, because of the Broncos coaching and the way the Broncos were set up in the draft and everything, it was this convergence of Broncos media on Mobile, Alabama, and it was just so cool to see it, And so
that's awesome.
It was great to connect with you guys, and we hung out all week, just every day, sharing insights in the stands and scouting together, and it was a blast. I absolutely enjoyed it.
Brandon and I talked about being a fly on the wall at Broncos OTAs. We kind of got to be a fly on the wall out of the Senior Bowl a little bit, just kind of sticking our ear in places, maybe that we weren't supposed to be, but you know what? Who cares? We were just there to have a good time, to represent well the sites that we write for. And of course, you write with Mile High Report, which is an awesome website, legendary Denver Broncos website. And so we're thankful for all your contributions to Broncos country, the analysis that you put out. It's exciting to have you on, Jeff, for real.
I'm definitely honored, and excited to dig into the topics today too. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. But before we do, I think the people want to know more about Jeff. So
we're all about the story here at the Juice.
That's right.
There's so many podcasts that are talking like the cold, dead statistics of everything, that we're like, who are these guys as a story? Like, if this dude was in the movie, like, what was his prequel like? What was his origin stories? We want to know about the human soul that's riding inside of that meat vessel. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, that's a great intro for these questions. I love that, the human soul and the meat vessel. So let's see. So small town, grew up in a small town in Texas. Studied broadcasting communications in undergrad, and so did play-by-play for college, basketball team that I was for the school I went to, John Brown, that I graduated from. Got my MBA and kind of went into the business world, but continued my love for the Broncos. I've got a picture of myself at like 3 or 4 years old wearing a little Broncos t-shirt and about nothing else. And so we won't put that on the internet, but for as long as I remember, I was a Broncos fan, and my grandfather was a Broncos fan. And my mom always grew up telling this story that he was a big Broncos fan, and it was, I forget which Super Bowl. It was one of the ones where they were losing back in the 70s. I forget who it was. Maybe the one they played the 49ers.
That sounds about right. 49ers, Redskins, Cowboys, one of those.
It was one. I think it was the Cowboys one. It was the Cowboys one. So my mom has this story of
Niners or 80s.
Yeah. So my grandpa's in the den, and she remembers him telling my mom, if they lose, this stool is going through the wall. And my grandma, or my mom's mom, she remembers her saying, well, that's fine. You just stay in here and sleep here tonight then. and like left and went up there. And so sure enough, like when the game ends, they hear this massive thump, and he threw the stool through the wall. and my grandfather slept on the couch that night because of what my grandma said, or my grandma told him to. So that's the passion of the Broncos that runs through my family.
Yeah.
Outside of Broncos, though, I'm a huge music fan, and so I play the banjo and play the guitar.
That's awesome.
So love to do that. Have a little band that travels around in Northwest Arkansas, where I live now. And so,
what's the band name?
The Roots Tour. And so we kind of do like bluegrass and roots music. We don't have anything out yet, currently recorded, but we just kind of do local shows and stuff. But hopefully this summer get some stuff on, down on a track and put it out. But so that's what I like to do in my spare time.
That's really awesome. Cool. That's really cool. It's interesting.
I wish you had a banjo right now.
I know. I was just gonna say it's an interesting instrument to claim as your own. Like I play the banjo. A lot of people might say I play the drums, I play the guitar, I play the piano. No. Banjo. How did you get into the banjo?
Yeah, so growing up in East Texas, the bluegrass scene's pretty good over there, but then my family was just big into bluegrass, and so all of my siblings play. So I come from a big family. There's 6 of us, 6 siblings. So we all just grew up playing. My mom got us into it at an early age. And so she would make us, we picked an instrument. She would make us practice, took us to piano lessons. And when that didn't really take, we jumped over to stringed instruments. And so, but I remember my mom would make us sit inside and practice for at least 30 minutes before we could go outside and play, or, get on a video game or something like that. And I hated it then, but I'm so thankful now, because it's a skill that, not a lot of people have, and that's that I'll carry on for the rest of my life. And so absolutely so grateful for that. But that's how I got into it. And so my siblings still live around the area, and they moved up to Northwest Arkansas as well with my family. And so we all, my brother's in the band, and we all, just play and hang out together. And so it's a blast.
That's so cool. That's awesome. So how did you get into Broncos writing?
I actually came in as a fan. And so what's kind of fun about, the Broncos community, and specifically the site I write for, Mile High Report, what's cool about, it's the communities that these sites build, and so I plugged in as a fan and just, logged on with an email address and a username and started just commenting here and there. Did that and kind of lurked on articles and comments and stuff for a couple years. And would write a couple fan posts in the fan post section, if you're familiar with like the SB Nation format, where they let some of the fans contribute. Started getting on Twitter as well, and so when I would write a fan post, I would tag all of the writers that I knew on my report about my fan post. And so finally, one of them, I guess, heard all my constant pestering, and so they picked it up and liked it. So we kind of got to know each other through some of that. So I wrote a couple more fan posts. And then, so one day I just randomly reached out to one of their editors, Lori Lattimore Volkman, who does an incredible job for Mile High Report, and just sent her an email one day. And the email subject line was, "Put me in, coach." And I was like, hey, let me, I'd love to contribute. I've done some fan posts, I'd be honored to write for you guys. And so they brought me on staff a couple years ago, and been doing it ever since. So
nice. What's your favorite story that you've written so far?
Probably one of the ones that I had the most fun, the most recent one, was I did a in-depth scouting report on Baker Mayfield. And so the other part of me is I'm a huge Oklahoma Sooner fan, and so subsequently a big Baker Mayfield fan. And so did a big scouting report for him during the draft. Obviously he ended up going #1 overall to the Browns, so Denver didn't get a chance with him. But that was a really fun project, just getting to dive in, and for me, getting to kind of dig into get into the myth busting on, Mayfield's game and his stats and the offense that he came from and that kind of thing. And so it was a lot of fun to dig into some of that. And Lincoln Riley's offense over there is a masterpiece, and so it was cool to kind of dig into that some.
That's so cool. Yeah, and I assume that having that experience at the Senior Bowl was valuable for you in that process, and especially for evaluating for the Broncos specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing those guys up close, there's no substitute for it, and just getting to see how they carry themselves as well was kind of fun. And you saw it, Sayre, when we were, in the stands. You get to watch Baker off to the side, taking extra mental reps and working on his footwork every second he had in between reps, and it was just fun to see. And so it was definitely cool to see it up close. It gives you another dimension to it.
What was your one moment at the Senior Bowl that you will never forget?
There was two. And if you scroll my Twitter account, you can see both of them. One of them was interviewing Baker Mayfield, and I'm about a foot away from him, asking him a question. So I have that on my Twitter account, and so I got a chance to ask him a question in one of the interviews, and talk to him about the Broncos and stuff for a second. And then the second day, and actually I've got it on it's my profile photo on my Twitter. And you were the photographer for this, Sayre.
Yeah, I was.
Photo cred to Sayre. He took a photo of me interviewing John Elway. And so that was probably my biggest moment because, I had posters, and I have a football card collections and jerseys. He was my idol growing up. And so just getting to be on the same field and get to interview him for, a quick second was a dream come true.
Yeah, it was surreal. The whole experience really being there. I remember the first day that I walked in, and I'm walking into this, looks like a high school football stadium. And you look up and there's John Lynch, former Denver Broncos safety, current general manager of the San Francisco 49ers. And then you look to your, he's there on your left, and you look to your right and there's Steve Atwater. And then you look up the next direction and there's Drew Rosenhaus. And we were walking up to the bleachers one day, and the next general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, Eric DeCosta, was just walking up next to us, just talking to some other personnel in the Ravens front office. I mean, it was crazy. Or one day we were sitting there just kind of watching the practice unfold, and then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, look behind you. Look. And Andy Reid's just sitting a couple rows behind, I mean, it was a wild experience because you're around so many different people, and big names in the NFL. I think one of the coolest things that happened for me while we were there was I was standing on the field level, and Nick Saban walked in. And of course, we're in Alabama, so everybody's getting all excited about it. They want his autograph, they want to shake his hand, they want to take pictures with him or whatever. And so he's just kind of, shaking people's hand down the line, and he comes up and gets closer to me. And there's a guy standing next to me that he just kind of like started conversing with. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, who's this guy? Why is he so important? I had no idea. It was just this guy standing next to me, a bald guy with a goatee. And I come to find out that it was Brian Dable, the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, who was the coordinator at Alabama last year. So, I mean, you just never know who you're standing next to. And then Dable was having a conversation with John Lynch about the Jimmy Garoppolo trade. And you're just like, you're happy to be a fly on the wall in those moments, but you're just kind of like, what do I do here? I mean, it was crazy. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, and we'll talk movies and geeking out here in a little bit. But if you've seen the movie Ready Player One,
oh yeah,
so they go into this digital world with all their online stuff. This felt like, I don't know, it felt like the reverse of that. It's like my Twitter feed came to life on the field. Like you're standing on the field walking around, and you're like, oh, I know that guy. I see his tweets all the time. Like, oh, there's Daniel Jeremiah. Oh, there, it's just like this swath of just NFL writers and the whole community just are surrounding you. Is so cool.
That's a great comparison, Brandon. We were just comparing the experience of the Senior Bowl with all these NFL personalities to Ready Player One, where you've got every character from every possible movie as an avatar in one space. That's a great comparison. Actually,
that's interesting.
What did you think of Ready Player One, by the way?
Me?
Yeah. I wanna hear your thoughts on that. I never got those.
Remember, I boycotted it.
Oh, that's right. It's not out yet. I thought it might be out by now. Yeah, that's my fault.
It's about to be. Yeah, I boycotted it because I'm a little irritated. I'm a little irritated at Spielberg, but
when you said that, it made a lot of sense to me. Yeah, no, I completely understand. I get it.
There's he's taken a very anti-Netflix, anti-streaming posture, which is kind of like taxi drivers rebelling against Uber is the best way to explain it. So I decided that I would wait until his movie came out on a streaming platform to boycott him.
Oh, I like that. That's good.
That is.
And I know it's going to be a good movie, but I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
I think you'll enjoy it. I loved it. I thought it was really good.
I liked your, speaking of comparisons, Jeff, I looked you up when Sayre said who was coming on here, and I saw your post about the 53, and you're talking about, I'm sorry to Thanos all of the favorite players when you're talking about cutting Janovich, cutting Isaiah McKenzie, cutting all these people, and it's like, oh, that's good. I like it.
Yeah, I had to be careful there because it was like a day after the new movie came out, and so I didn't want to put any spoilers in there, but I couldn't resist.
Yeah, it was too good. It's too good.
We've gone full spoiler here on the Juice, and Brandon had a great analogy with Thanos in the last episode. I think you should share that with Jeff now. And
I said I didn't know if you caught this, but it was really just foreshadowing the Denver Broncos 2018 season, because, we're going to play against 13 teams in the regular season, and then we're going to take, we're obviously going to get a first round bye. So we're going to take out 3 more on our way through the Super Bowl. So that's literally half the teams in the NFL. So we're going to Thanos half of the NFL.
I like it. Bringing balance to the world of the NFL.
You got it.
The NFL is not right unless the Denver Broncos are on top. That's where the peace comes in. You just sit out and you just peacefully overlook.
Someone has to stop the Patriots, and we seem to be the only team that can do that.
Yep, Captain America. Somebody's got to stop him.
There's a joke or an analogy to be made there somewhere about the stones and the Super Bowl rings coinciding or something like that.
It's true. We'll find it and tweet it at some point.
Yeah, we will come up with it. Well, taking out half the NFL is going to require a lot of players stepping up for the Denver Broncos this year. I mean, they're coming off a 5-11 season, very disappointing. Just so many things went wrong with that team. But one of the things that I think was a big factor was the fact that they didn't get much contribution from their rookie class. There was no, other than Garrett Bowles, there was really nothing except for Isaiah McKenzie contributing negatively. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is because they essentially redshirted a number of guys. I mean, DeMarcus Walker was transitioning to the outside linebacker position, which didn't make any sense to me from the start because he was really only great in college as an interior defensive lineman. And that's a different topic for a different day. But there was just a lot of different things about that rookie class that I didn't understand throughout the year. But now we're entering year 2 for some of these guys, and it's really not technically their second year in the NFL because none of them are very little NFL experience. And so today I want to talk about 3 or 4 redshirt rookies for the Denver Broncos. And I think the biggest name right now in Broncos country, a player who's probably not expected to contribute much this year, but maybe in the future, and a player that Brandon and I have talked about quite a bit, is quarterback Chad Kelly. Swag Kelly. Loved him coming out of the draft. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions about Chad Kelly, and I'm cool with that. But when I watched him, I saw a guy that he just had that it factor. He understood and he understands the game of football. He understands what he's supposed to do, when he's supposed to do it. He's got the arm talent. He's got mobility. He stepped up big in big games. I'm interested to see
plays
Chad
a
Kelly.
Fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. What are your guys' thoughts on Chad Kelly? Jeff, let's see. I want to hear what you have to say. I've never heard any of your evaluations of Chad Kelly. I didn't ask you before we started this. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on him.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the fire and the competitiveness because he definitely has that, and also the swagger. It's his whole nickname as well. But what's funny is, so throughout the draft process, and it didn't really click with me until you just said that. But throughout the draft process, we've been, or at least I have really been latching on to the way Elway's been talking about the quarterback position this year, because it feels like this offseason there's been a lot of questions, to him about that because of the failed Paxton Lynch pick, the fact that Denver hasn't had a quarterback in a couple of years. And so I remember during the offseason or it was one of his off-season interviews that he and Vance Josephs had. They said, what makes a successful quarterback in your mind? And he really, it felt like, started to make a philosophical shift away from, big arm talent, has to have the athletic ability, but he's also got to have that. He almost said it's over 50% mental. He's got to have that competitive toughness. He's got to have the ability to get knocked down and get right back up and not be fragile as a quarterback in the NFL. And for me, as a Baker Mayfield fan, and throughout the draft process, I immediately saw the connection. And, word is that Denver liked Mayfield and, they liked that about him. But I think that directly correlates to Chad Kelly as well. You see the way that he played at Ole Miss, and then the way that he's currently carrying himself in some of the quotes that he's had coming out recently out of the rookie minicamp. To me, it fits really well. And he's not a guy that is, the 6'5" massive arm, even though he can rip it. But he's also got those intangibles as well that it feels like Elway is discovering more and more, or at least admitting more and more. They definitely make a difference at the quarterback position.
I just had a thought sparked by something you said, and I think it's really interesting because it's like, okay, we can obviously point to he must have wanted the cerebral thing from post Manning, right? But why did it take him 3 off seasons to start talking about that? And I wonder if it was the juxtaposition of seeing the absence of it these past 2 years to where now he's come to that conclusion. He needed a couple of years away from it to see it not being there to go, okay, we need to get back to that.
Well, it's also you begin to see it. I feel like the vacuum of leadership at the quarterback position became exponentially worse the more veterans began to leave. And so you had Peyton Manning, he carried it throughout, 2015, 2016. Peyton Manning was no longer there, but you still had DeMarcus Ware in the locker room, and you were still coming off a Super Bowl, and people had that, it just felt like that championship aura. The defense was still on top and that kind of thing. Then you transition to 2017. DeMarcus Ware isn't there. Aqib Talib is, kind of doing his antics. They've come off a losing season, so the defense is still infighting with the offense. Emmanuel Sanders is out there throwing up his hands at the quarterback for missing all the time because he's wide open, and who can blame him, right? Because he's running wide open routes and they're missing him. And so it felt like the need, and the Denver Bronco offense has just been crying out for leadership over the last 2 years. And I think it's just become more and more evident, like you said, to Elway over these last 2 years, seeing it.
That's a good point.
Those are, gosh, you guys made some great points there. And as you were saying that, I was looking something up as well. I wanted to see how many quarterbacks, how many teams in general have beaten Nick Saban's Alabama team since he became the head coach. And if I look it up really quickly here, Nick Saban became the head coach of Alabama in 2007. He's lost 20 games in that time. And in Chad Kelly's first season with Ole Miss, he beat Alabama. That was their only loss in 2015, was against Ole Miss and Chad Kelly. And Chad Kelly played really well in that game. And don't get me wrong, I'm not some Chad Kelly truther. I'm not trying to paint him in a light that he's not really, because he plays for the Denver Broncos. I don't buy all the stuff about him being drafted as a favor, because the Broncos would not have wasted all this time that they have with him if it was a favor. I just don't buy it. And that's if people don't like me over that, that's fine. I just don't believe it. But to me, like what you were saying, Elway needed that juxtaposition of seeing the void of leadership at the quarterback position, because Chad Kelly really exemplifies what it means to be a great leader from the quarterback position specifically. He hasn't always exemplified being a leader off the field, right? I mean, he's had the AK-47 comments. He stormed the field at his brother's football game, which actually I like that. I don't know about you guys, but he runs onto the field at his brother's game to come to his brother's defense. I mean, I feel like that's something that Baker Mayfield probably would have done. And the biggest thing for me is with Chad Kelly, you see a guy like Josh Allen, picked 7th overall in the draft, biggest arm in the draft, got the size, got the athleticism. What happened when Josh Allen played Nebraska? What happened when Josh Allen played Iowa? What happened when Josh Allen played Oregon? He crumbled in every single one of those games. And I'll never forget the game that he was playing against Oregon. He looked like he was about to cry on the sideline. And I don't blame him. I mean, if you're struggling that badly on a big stage, NFL scouts are at the game. The emotion of that moment is so heavy. I probably would have cried too. I'm not blaming him for crying, but what I wasn't impressed by was the way that he played on the field as a result of that.
Yeah, I don't want that in my quarterback.
I agree. And
I mean, that's fine if you do it, then I'm not going to draft you either.
No, I know. That's what I was saying. I was telling people on Twitter the other day or yesterday, somebody's doing this thing where they tag 8 people and they put me at quarterback, and I'm like, I'm going to throw 4 interceptions, but I might throw the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah.
That's just how I would play. I get, you get into that funk as a quarterback, and for Josh Allen, it was apparent that he didn't have the it factor. Chad Kelly has the it factor to go into Alabama, undefeated Alabama, and win that game. I mean, who does that? Not many people have done that. And that's something that's worth considering when you're talking about the potential even backup quarterback of the Denver Broncos. And I find it very interesting that they could be one snap away from Chad Kelly taking the field and taking the ball.
And what'll be interesting is in the preseason getting to actually watch him play, because he hasn't had that opportunity to, because he's been rehabbing the knee injury. And really, he's just been rehabbing his body the last, because he's been having surgeries and stuff. You looked at how he came into camp, and Coach Joseph even been admitted, he kind of came into camp out of shape, and he had been hurt and stuff. And this year he slimmed down. I saw today on Twitter, he slimmed down about 20 to 25 pounds, and has gotten stronger and looks more of the part of the NFL quarterback, instead of coming. And so he just looks healthy. He's back to where he was. So it'll be interesting to see him take the field. And what'll be cool is the fact that it feels like Denver has pretty good, more depth, especially at the skill position players, than they've had in a long time. So it'll be fun to see him play with some of those guys.
Yeah.
It's what you're talking about, Sayre. You're coming in with, you almost get another fresh round of draft picks with this 2017 class of skill position players.
It's like we have 2 years of rookie players that we're all loading up this year, which is so exciting.
It is. It's crazy. And I didn't think about it until the Broncos were drafting. And I love loading up at specific positions. And when they drafted 2 wide receivers pretty close together, I was like, oh man, that's really cool. And then I got to thinking about Carlos Henderson and Isaiah McKenzie last year. They did a very similar thing last year too. And I'm thinking, man, they're setting themselves up to have this wide receiver core of the future. And regardless of what people think about Isaiah McKenzie after last year, I mean, even if you think about Carlos Henderson, who we'll talk about in a bit, it was just cool to me to see that they were doing that. And so I'm interested to know, Brandon, first of all, if you've played the story mode on Madden, where it's basically the movie mode thing where you can play that thing.
Oh yeah, I have. Devin Wade.
Devin Wade, that's right. I know you create your own story in Madden, which we need to tell Jeff about at some point.
I brought Devin Wade into the Madden. So you can go and create a character, and you can set him as Devin Wade's face. So not only did I bring Devin Wade in, but his buddy Colt Cruz, that's also the side character in Madden, I brought them both in. And I made Devin Wade, in the very beginning, I made him the quarterback of the Broncos. So my Madden franchise started not only with my created coach character, but Devin Wade drafted to the Broncos and was the face of the franchise.
That's awesome.
I like it.
And he's still in the league right now. I think he's about where I'm playing. Let's see, because I have it pulled up right here. I think he's about 37 years old.
Oh my
God. Wow. He's still going strong. And I think he's currently the quarterback of the Cowboys, because Broncos obviously have Tom Brady's son, Jack Brady, at this point in time.
It's so cool, man.
I've got to get in your Madden league, man.
Dude, it's fun. Gosh. It's a whole created universe. I'll tell you real quick. The coolest part about it is I have a list of NFL players' kids, and I figured out when they were born and when they would be drafted. And it's called the Descendants list. And I import them into Madden. So I've got Balin Breeze and then Tom Brady's second son, Benjamin Brady, are rookies this year.
You used an incognito tab when you searched all their kids, right?
Oh, you're right. I prefaced it when I first brought this up. I was like, this may sound a little creepy, but I'm studying their kids. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good.
He's 37 years old in his 13th season.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. I was wondering what you think. I mean, Chad Kelly, if you were to make a Madden story franchise out of his career, I mean, that would be something that could be fairly similar to the story of Devin Wade. I mean, as far as getting kicked out of Clemson.
Right. And I love the idea of this. I was thinking about this even as Jeff was talking. Like, I love the fact, like, everyone talks Tom Brady, being a late round pick. What if a quarterback went from Mr. Irrelevant to face of the franchise? We have never seen that before. Forget about the freaking 6th round, 5th round, whatever. Like a Mr. Irrelevant taking over as a starter and doing well on the team, not just, kind of being like a Trevor Siemian 7th round that comes in and comes out. But that is a storyline. That is an underdog story that I'm rooting for. And I'm not expecting it to happen, but how cool would that be if it did?
And that's why you're going to continue to see stuff in, Denver Broncos, in Broncos country about Chad Kelly, because it's exciting,
Yeah.
Denver, to be honest, for the last couple of years, hasn't had much to get excited about at the quarterback position. So, what if they want to get excited about a guy that, brings a little bit of juice and has some potential, I'm all for it.
Yep.
Is it just with Denver Broncos fans? Is it just simply the devil you don't know versus the devil you know, or do you guys think there's actually some substance here?
I think it's a mix. I think, you saw it with Kyle Slaughter too, and so It was like the mania for Kyle Slaughter. So I think there's a level of that with almost any NFL team. I was talking to my brother; he's a big Cowboys fan, and we were talking about the Chad Kelly stuff, and he was like, "That sounds like the Kellen Moore craze of 2015." He was like, everybody in Cowboys country was just like gung ho about Kellen Moore, and he's a good guy. He's their coach, he's their quarterback coach now, and is a super sharp guy, but just wasn't, never panned out as a player. So I think there's some of that with every team. Like with Denver, every undrafted free agent we see, we draft or we sign afterwards is like, oh, this is the guy. This guy's gonna,
the next Chris Harris,
right? But
yes.
I think there's something to it because he's different than just a normal undrafted guy. The success that he had at a major program, and like you talked about, playing against top-notch talent, and playing the way that he did, and the fact that it's the health thing and some of the off-the-field stuff that kind of dropped him down. There hasn't been, there's been some critique of his game, but there hasn't been really this, massive critique of his game. It's been more all the other surrounding things that made him drop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember during last year's draft, I remember listening to Mike Mayock say, if not for off-field and medical, he's a day 2 pick. He was pretty straightforward about that. Or that was last year. Yeah. So when he said that, it got me to thinking, okay, so I'm not crazy. I'm sitting here watching this guy play it. I'm like, why is he not being talked about on day 2 of the draft, if not at least early day 3? And then you look at the injury and the off-field and all that stuff. But with Chad Kelly, the biggest thing to me is the ability to step up in big games. When he got kicked out of Clemson, he went to East Mississippi Community College, which hopefully you guys have at least, you got it on the queue to watch Last Chance U. That's where he played, is at Last Chance U. And Chad Kelly was, he was probably on his last chance. You don't get kicked off of Dabo Swinney's team unless it's for a good reason, I'm sure. So Chad Kelly gets kicked out of college, goes and plays really well at EMCC, puts up big numbers, wins the national championship there, goes to Ole Miss, beats Alabama, wins the SEC, all that good stuff. And then all of his buddies and teammates left after the 2015 season. Laquan Treadwell, Laramie Tunsil, a number of big-name players left, and he was kind of left to do everything by himself, and that didn't work out well. So a combination of things, I think, played into that. But the biggest thing for Chad Kelly is going to be getting out on the field. Like you said, Jeff, we just need to see him play. We need to see what he's got.
Yeah, and it's going to be, that'll be the most exciting first and second or third quarters of the first and second preseason game out there in Broncos country. Yeah. Which is good. I'm all for it. Anything that makes the preseason more watchable and, guys with potential is exciting.
So, Jeff, Paxton or Chad's are backup this year, week 1?
Oh, gosh. You put me on the spot with it.
Mm-hmm. No preloaded questions here on the Juice.
I still think Paxton Lynch is, unless we see something And again, I'm speaking out of complete ignorance in terms of Chad Kelly because we haven't seen him on a field in two years, and so it's so hard to say. I think Paxton Lynch is only for the fact that he's a first-round draft pick, and just the way they're talking about him doesn't sound like they're ready to completely kick him to the curb yet. The way Joseph talked about, okay, he can now just relax now that we have Case Keenum as the starter, and he can focus on being the backup and just developing. I don't see them dropping him in the depth chart one more or making him endure one more competition, which says a lot about his psyche and all of that.
Only a slight disagreement there in the sense that he is in a competition.
Right.
He's in that competition with Chad, and that's where it's like I want to see him thrive in the competition, which is not what we saw the past couple of years. Is somebody that steps up to the plate and imposes his will in that competition. So I feel like, yes, like he doesn't have to compete for the starting job, but now he's got Swag Kelly clipping at his heels, for the number 2 spot. So I just want to see him. I'm not willing to give up on Paxton yet either, but I want to see him like take that challenge and really embrace it and do well.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time we saw a 7th rounder beat out Paxton Lynch, so it's definitely plausible.
You're dropping fire.
Fire extinguisher.
So it's definitely plausible. I think I'd put it at a 50-50 on Kelly or Lynch, which is saying a lot about, the state of Lynch's career right now. But
yeah,
I tend to agree with that. I think it's at least a 50-50 chance that it's, Lynch or Kelly. And I think a lot of fans will be surprised to see how well Chad Kelly steps up and plays. I just have confidence in him. I really do. And I'm willing to admit I'm wrong on that. If he stinks and he doesn't show up, I'm willing to be wrong about that. That's okay. Another player who's going to have to really there he is, Devin Wade.
For those on the video podcast.
Yeah, I love it. That's so fun. Another player who's going to have a lot of competition. It's going to be a tough road for him. Carlos Henderson, last year's 3rd-round pick. Guys, one of the craziest stats that I read about Carlos Henderson was he had more all-purpose yards than Christian McCaffrey in 2016 when they were both still in college. More all-purpose yards in terms of as a receiver, as a runner, as a returner. And we know how great Christian McCaffrey was. I mean, he was a top 10 pick because of his ability to do everything well. Carlos Henderson outgained him in yardage. And yeah, he's playing different level of competition, but the guy put up ridiculous numbers as a receiver, returner, and runner out of the backfield.
Wasn't he yards after catch too?
Big time.
Like number 1 or 2 or something like that?
Number one.
Number one.
That's awesome.
And what a disappointment for him to injure his thumb in training camp and then aggravate it in a preseason game. We didn't get to see much of Carlos Henderson, even in camp, at least at full speed. And so he's another guy that I'm very optimistic about, even despite the issue this offseason with marijuana. When he got in trouble for that, he went pedal to the metal. I don't know if you guys follow him on Instagram at all, but he went ballistic working out after that moment. I mean, he was posting 2-3 times a day, his workout sessions, just getting ready for the off-season grind. And I was impressed, and I think that he's going to really surprise some people this year. What do you guys think about Carlos Henderson's ability to factor in now to this story for the Denver Broncos as we approach the 2018 season?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm a huge fan of Carlos Henderson. I don't know if you guys follow Matt Harmon, who does he has a reception perception is his kind of tagline. If you don't follow him, go check him out on Twitter. But also he writes for he does the NFL Next Gen Stats, and so he has a whole thing on wide receivers and their route tree and their success against press and zone and all of that, and also how much they run the full route tree. He's got a lot of great data on a lot of the receivers coming in the draft. He's bullish on Carlos Henderson. It was one of his favorite picks last year coming out as a receiver. And then this year he tweeted out again talking about Carlos Henderson and said, hey, I'm still in on Carlos Henderson being big for Denver. One of the interesting things that I wanted to bring up. And I know we're not talking about this year's prospects, but if you look at and I tweeted this out the other day, if you look at what Denver's doing at the receiver position, and Carlos Henderson leads the pack on this, he's an after-the-catch monster. Let me get some of his stats real quick. So this is from – let's see. This is from the reception perception stuff. His broken tackle rate is just absolutely ridiculous after the catch. Here we go. In space. He was only brought down on first contact on 21% of his in-space attempts.
Holy cow.
And so
that's amazing.
So out of that class, he's a massive after-the-catch guy. And so you pair that with what Denver did this year. I'll read you the stat from I was just going through this. It was after Denver drafted both their receivers, and I started looking at Matt Harmon's breakdown of these guys. And he's talking about Deshaun Hamilton. He says it was good to see Hamilton make plays with the ball in his hand. The Penn State receiver broke 2+ tackles on 30% of his catches in space.
Wow.
He's an after the catch. He said only after the catch dynamo Carlos Henderson from 2017 and stunningly athletic Cortland Sutton of this year posted higher multiple broken tackle rates. So the broken tackle rates, you stack it up. It's Deshaun Hamilton, it's Cortland Sutton, and it's Carlos Henderson. All three of those guys currently play for the Denver Broncos. And so you can
bringing the big time stat, man.
You can kind of see what Denver's, especially when you look at what Case Keenum did at Minnesota, 50% of Case Keenum's yards were from after the catch. If you break it down. So it's pretty clear what Denver's plan is currently is, getting Musgrave. He's a genius at scheming guys, mismatches, getting them out in space and getting them open, and then let these guys go to work. And so for that reason, I love Carlos Henderson coming in this year, whether it's outside, because he played a lot of people see him as a slot receiver. I see him as an Emmanuel Sanders, kind of guy, or I've heard him compared to like a Golden Tate or somebody like that, after the catch. So I think he can play outside as much as he can inside. And so, you could see him rotating in with Sanders or DT with Hamilton in the slot. You could see Henderson going in the slot. And so there's a lot of possibilities. And for the first time in a while, a lot of depth at the receiver position now. And so I think there's plenty of space for Henderson.
Man, those are huge numbers right there. Those are huge. And it brings up a larger point in that Nikki Jabvala was tweeting yesterday or last night around this time, actually, about the fact that the Broncos are expanding their analytics team. Mitch Tanney, who's the brother of the trick shot quarterback Alex Tanney, who's bounced around for a few NFL teams. Mitch Tanney is their lead analytics guy right now. But if they're looking to expand their analytics team, it means that those type of numbers that you just brought up are things that are getting brought up in the draft room, in the draft meetings, the pre-draft meetings. They're saying, okay, we want the 3 best guys at breaking tackles that we can get at the wide receiver position, and we want the quarterback who understands how to exploit those matchups. I mean, it's all part of the bigger picture.
I love that. And I would say I don't have any game-breaking Carlos Henderson statistics, but I will say my favorite Broncos receiver ever is still, and I know this is maybe a little unpopular, but is Brandon Marshall. And we used to go to bed watching his highlight reel videos, putting me to sleep, and just watch. That was what I loved the most. It was like a Harlem Globetrotter game. Like as soon as you got him the ball, like just all the things he was able to do afterwards was so fun to watch. It's great seeing guys go up and make the awesome catches, which he could do as well. But just those ones that you would get it to him, and then he's juking this guy and juking this dude and spinning around these guys. And I know it got him into some trouble sometime, but it was so fun to watch. So strictly from an entertainment perspective, having all these guys that are going to be able to do something once they got the ball. And even recently with CJ Anderson, back in his first couple seasons, I used to say to my dad, like, dude, he makes the first guy miss every time. And we would watch it time after time after time. So I just love that quality. So that's my contribution to that. I'm excited to see those 3 guys for that reason.
Absolutely. And that's where the NFL is going these days. It's a space game, it's getting the ball out to your playmakers. And if they can make a guy miss, that's the difference between 2 to 5 yards and 10 to 15 yards, that's the difference between a short pass or a 2nd and 2, if you pick an extra 5 yards or whatever it is. And so when you look at the Minnesota offense that Case Keenum ran, it was all about staying ahead of the sticks. And that's what he was efficient. It was swing passes. It was slant flat combos, swinging it out to Latavius Murray once Dalvin Cook got hurt. And it was staying on schedule in the running game. And so I think the broken tackles and the guys playing in space is just an extension of that.
Yeah.
That's such a great quality that Carlos Henderson brings to the table. I love those numbers. Those get me excited about the Broncos offense, and I haven't been excited really about the Broncos offense for like 4 years. So that gets me really pumped to know those 3 guys. I hadn't heard that yet. Those 3 guys are at the top of the reception perception in terms of not only breaking tackles, but yards after the catch. I mean, that means that the Broncos have 3 young guys that are fighters with the ball in their hands, and I love that. I love that just gets me excited. That thrills me for this upcoming competition and what's going to be happening at that position. And I think another guy that's going to really factor in is tight end Jake Butt, and he's another one of those redshirt rookies. And we've talked about the tight end position a little bit on this show. In fact, last show we talked about Troy Fumagalli, Brandon's guy, being one of the 3 most important offseason acquisitions for the Broncos. And I think, like Brandon was saying, and Brandon, I would like for you to maybe go into this a little bit more about why you feel like Fumagalli can be successful along with Jake Butt. And the addition of those 2 in the offense with the receivers that we just described, how does Jake Butt factor in for the Broncos this year?
Well, I just love, I've been missing since we had the Manning to Julius Thomas and then going back, obviously, to the Elway and Sharp. Just I feel like it's almost like a piece of Bronco football that just really needs to be there. And Case especially kind of plays in that way too, where, he needs like a Kyle Rudolph kind of piece. But I love what it does to the middle of the field, and the opportunities it's going to open up on the outside. And, having that 2 tight end combination and both of them being, not just guys that need to go out and be pass catchers, but are at least capable blockers. And then, if they got somebody on Butt, it was kind of our point. It's like, who are they going to put on Fumagalli? And so if we can get something out of these guys and then maybe Hireman, I'm loving the possibilities of them and Hamilton and just these guys that we can run in the slot and in the middle. Cause we, just being able to keep the chains moving. I forget the terminology you just used as far as, staying ahead of the chains.
Yeah. Staying ahead of the chains.
Yeah. There we go. I like that. And I think that's where it's like, just to be able to chop it up down the field. Like, I don't care if we're hitting it big every time, but I just want to I remember thinking, Sayre and I talked about this either last one or the one before, like sometimes it seems like rocket science the past few years, the Broncos just to pick up a first down. And then you watch other teams just cutting it up and it's like making it look easy. Like, why does it have to be this complicated for us to do that? And I think that these guys that are going to be able to, be accountable on 3rd down and be reliable on 3rd down, it's going to be a game changer for us, whether it's Butt, whether it's Fumagalli, whether Hireman actually shows something. Like, I think that we have a possibility of one of these guys giving us that piece that we've been lacking.
Well, I love what you're saying about opening up the whole field, because if you look at, and so to me, it's twofold. So it's the addition of weapons that we haven't had in the past. And so if we wanted to exploit the middle of the field, we really couldn't have the past 2 years just due to personnel and the weapons. I mean,
right.
They were just subpar. 2, it's the offense and the quarterback being able to get it to them. And so if you look at the heat map from Trevor Siemian, and Paxton Lynch and Brock Osweiler are kind of sprinkled in there, but Trevor Siemian had the most starts over the last 2 years. If you look at the heat map from Trevor Siemian, it was overwhelmingly skewed to the outside the numbers, and it was also overwhelmingly skewed to a certain side. And so for one, the defense knew what side, what tendency he had. He would, tend to stare down specific things. And so, but watching him on tape, he was so much more comfortable with those timing throws to the outside. And that's why he ended up not thriving when the defense would squeeze down on those routes, because he couldn't throw it over the middle. He couldn't stretch the seams, and didn't have the vision to, find those guys over the middle. So it really limited a lot of the passing offense, because you can't, what are the tight ends good for? They're stretching the seams and they're moving the chains over the middle of the field. And those are the 2 things that Trevor Siemian, or that our quarterback really struggled with over the last 2 years. And so, you can call it chicken or the egg. Did he not have the weapons to stretch the field? Did the quarterback just not do it? Well, either way, this year, both of those areas are tremendously improved. And you said it. You said it really well. Case Keenum needed that Kyle Rudolph guy. I quickly pulled up some Kyle Rudolph stats. And this ties into something. I think Mile High Report will be talking about this tomorrow. If you pull up the red zone statistics, so not only middle of the field, but the way Denver played in the red zone. Red zone statistics, we were dead last, except for the Cleveland Browns. So Denver was second to the Cleveland Browns in red zone scoring. If you subtract their deep red zone defense with their red zone offense. And most of that is just because of our, inability to score touchdowns in the red zone. Take a look at a guy like Keenum, who had one of the top efficiencies in the red zone last year as a quarterback. Pro Football Focus had an article about it. He was one of the top 5 in red zone scoring efficiency in the league last year at the quarterback position. And one of the big reasons, you look at Kyle Rudolph's stats. If you look at from Pro Football Reference and you kind of break down the splits, Kyle Rudolph had 8 touchdowns last year. If you break it down from his numbers in the red zone, he has 14 catches, 92 yards, 6 touchdowns in the red zone, 10 first downs.
Wow. So every time basically, or not every time, but half the time that he was targeted in the red zone, he hit pay dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. He was either catching a first down or a touchdown. And so
I think if we get out of Butt what we were hoping to, there's no reason he can't have that type of production.
Exactly.
What did you think, Jeff, of Butt coming out of the draft last year before his injury?
I thought he was a really solid guy, and I know a lot of people have compared him to Jason Witten, and I don't know about the specific comps to that, but one of the things that to me is that fits with that Jason Witten comp is just the fact that he's able to do a little bit of everything. He's not a guy that's going to light up the scoreboard or, blow you away on his measurables, but he's going to do everything consistently and everything well. And so for a team like Denver that is missing, they haven't had really anything at the tight end position, starting there is a huge piece to me, because that's what Kyle Rudolph is. He's not, he'll make some big plays, but he's a chain mover. He's a red zone guy, And so for Jake Butt to be able to come in and do that, I really liked him coming out. And I had a quote from, I don't know if you guys follow, we met them down at the Senior Bowl, Sayre, NDT Scouting, some of the guys from there, Kyle Krabs. He's a really good follow on Twitter. I reached out to him over the draft because just thinking about this idea of Denver almost getting a second draft class with the guys coming in. So I asked him over this tight end class where a healthy Jake Butt would be ranked. And I asked him that back in April. And this was his response. He said he'd be in the mix for a tight end 3, right around with Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews. And he's a really well-rounded guy. Hope he's healthy. It was the tweet response to him. And these are guys that, are breaking down the top prospects all the time. So if you look at it for Denver, they not only get Troy Fumagalli, but then they also bring in essentially one of the top 3 tight ends, would be one of the top 3 tight ends in this class in Jake Butt last year, who has a year under his belt. And so it just goes to what you're saying, what we've been saying the whole time of just, it's a second draft class essentially. So I love the fact that, I love Jake Butt, and I think he'll be a great contributor for Denver at the tight end position, which we've needed.
I was gonna make a dad joke, but I'm gonna defer it to Brandon.
Well, I just thought of this for the first time. Like I was talking about, Julius Thomas and Shannon Sharp, and how I just love those tight ends when we're able to rely on them in the passing game, and what it changes. Isn't it interesting? We got 80 and 84. But golly.
80 and 84 is bringing back memories,
man. That's a good catch.
It's like having Thomas and Sharp on the same team at the same time.
Yeah. I love that. And what excites me about this topic specifically, guys, is the fact that you talk about a guy like Jake Butt, who could have easily been a top 50 pick in last year's draft were he fully healthy. You talk about a guy in Carlos Henderson who was I think he was the 82nd or 83rd overall pick in last year's draft. we're bringing in 5 new rookies. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. 5 new rookies who are top 99 picks in this year's draft, and we're bringing guys who could have been top 100 picks in last year's draft or this year's draft who haven't proven anything. So you're getting a lot of people complain about the upside of players under 25 on the Broncos roster. I was writing yesterday about the fact that their average age dropped over a full year on the roster this year compared to last year.
That's huge.
That's huge. That's one of the biggest things this offseason that I think John Elway
and I like how you started that article off with the old guys we've added. Because we have added some old guys. And so to still have that number drop that far is really cool.
Right. Like, you just said it. The key players that they added this offseason at some big positions, quarterback, right tackle. Those guys are the older veterans that they brought in. Clinton McDonald on the defensive line, and then Marquette King is one of the oldest players on the team as well. So it's interesting to me the way that the Broncos are reshaping this roster after last year, because there was a lot of roster turnover. There was a lot of it. And a lot of it comes from guys who didn't get to play much last year, these redshirt rookies. And we've talked about Chad Kelly. We've talked about Carlos Henderson. We talked about Jake Butt. There's a number of other guys that we could touch on because nobody besides Garrett Bowles played last season up until that last game, which was essentially a preseason game. Which guy that we haven't talked about, just really quick, are you guys most excited about? We'll start with you, Jeff. Which guy are you most excited about this year as a redshirt rookie?
I'm really excited about DeMarcus Walker. And you mentioned it, he got a little bit of playing time in the Kansas City game. It was interesting because once he finally was able to start getting his weight up and towards the end of the season, they put him back into a natural position, which is, around at that interior line rushing from a 3-tech in sub packages. He looked really good. I was just watching tape of the Kansas City game a couple nights ago. And when you get, so what Denver would do too is when you're able to get him, at that, and people use 3-tech very squishily. I'm talking about the actual 3 lined up, outside the guard. When you line them up that far outside and you have Von Miller on that same side, commanding a lot of that attention, you're getting DeMarcus Walker one-on-one on a guard. And so when you put him one-on-one on those guards, he has a great, I broke it down when he first came into the league. He has a great swim move that to me reminds me of Malik Jackson. And it's a very developed swim move for a guy, for a young guy coming in. And so I'm really excited about Walker. And so I talked to, at the Senior Bowl, was able to talk to Bill Kolar and talked a little bit about DeMarcus Walker. And he was, his big emphasis was, well, man, he's got to gain weight. He's got to gain strength. That's a big focus of his this offseason. And he said, I have it on I mentioned this the other day on Twitter. He said, he said he was 250, but I never saw it on the scale. He was 245 throughout the season. So you've got an interior defensive line guy at 245 who now just a couple days ago is back up to 270. And so you give him a couple more, another month or two of offseason conditioning to get back up to that 280 range that he came in at. Wow. And providing it's all good weight and he can hold the strength, that's a great jump for a guy who was making an impact at 245 rushing against guards, and so I said it in the comments the other day on one of my articles for Mile High Report. To me, I see his role coming in this next year. One, I would grade DeMarcus Walker's season this coming year by quality, not quantity. And so he's probably going to get maybe 30% of the snaps, and that's fine if that. And so if you look at his snap count, if you look at his tackles or sacks and say, oh, he didn't have a good year this coming year, you're probably going to be right. You're probably going to be disappointed if you're looking at the numbers, but look at the quality of his rushes because he's pushing the pocket. And if they use him in that way, I think he can be a very quality, 10 snaps a game kind of guy who can get in there in sub packages and get after the quarterback and provide that interior pressure and provide a bit of the Antonio Smith role that he had in the 2015 Denver defense. A lot of people forget about him. He had 33% of the snaps and was a almost dedicated interior rusher. You never saw him in base package. He was a defensive end, defensive tackle who came in sub packages and pushed the pocket. And he had 33% of snaps and did that role very, very well. And so I could see DeMarcus Walker kind of playing that role as he kind of has a bit of a gap year getting back into, his normal weight, his normal strength, and, coming off of this redshirt year.
Brandon, what about you? Which redshirt rookie are you most excited about for this season?
That just got me excited about seeing some quality out of DeMarcus Walker.
I know.
But yeah, it was really cool. I would have to say D'Angelo Henderson, man. I think right now I'm in a place where, like, I've been a huge DJ fan for years, like most of us, just how he plays with heart and just fights for things. I loved CJ. And then, now I don't have a favorite right now. So it's like, as far as this bundle of guys we've got, which I think like most Bronco country, I'm more excited about Lindsey than Williams. But out of this whole, bundle, like, I don't know who I love the most. I don't know who I want to be like our longtime starter or I don't think I even have them ranked like 1 to 4, 1 to 5. But I liked what I saw in D'Angelo Henderson. And I think, like a lot of Broncos fans, I was surprised at how little he was used after kind of the tease that we got in the preseason of some of the things that he was able to do with the opportunities he was given, that I felt like we should have used him a little bit more. And I think a lot of fans share that sentiment. So seeing this in his second year, especially now that we are without that for sure chosen running back leader, I do want to go more toward one running back this year. I would like for us to be more of a bell cow offense and not be, a Shanahan four-headed monster. But at the same time, like I was really excited about Henderson, so I want to see what he does with some more opportunities. And I really, at this point, just don't have any horses in the race when it comes to which one of them I want to win. So I'm kind of leaving. It's an open competition for my affections right now between these running backs.
I'm with you on that, man. I'm really excited to see D'Angelo Henderson in what he can do in more of a full-time role. I mean, he's an interesting prospect at the position because he's built in such a way at like 5'7", 208, 210 pounds where you'd think, oh, well, he's probably pretty slow. No, this guy ran like a 4.47 or a 4.46 at his pro day at Coastal Carolina, or even at the combine. He set the track on fire. And so it's a really unique skill set. His quickness, obviously his nickname is Hop Henderson because of his foot quickness in short area, but he's just got a really unique blend of size, speed, quickness. He can run with some power. He's a really good receiver. I couldn't think of really anyone to compare him to except for Devontae Freeman from the Atlanta Falcons, but he has more time. He has better time, speed, and so just a really unique type of player. And I love the comparison of DeMarcus Walker to potentially Malik Jackson, but even Antonio Smith. You're right. He played a big role that year for that defense, and so I'm thrilled about all of these guys. I think the one that I really want to succeed the most is Carlos Henderson because of how excited I was when they drafted him. It's just like you get this yards after the catch monster in the third round, potentially one of the best playmakers in the draft in the third round. I'm rooting for that guy. So,
and how awesome is it that we're even going into this where it's like, without DT and Emmanuel, we may still have like our wide receiver core, you know, and that's something that's like, for the past few years, it's like, well, what are we going to do after we lose DT and Emmanuel? We got nobody that's going to they're positional guys that, can do some stuff here and there, but to say we've got like 3 starters behind them, no way. But now it's exciting to see that those guys really could step up and either start for us in the future and even be starting for some teams right now.
Well, yeah, it's really cool when you start looking at the composition. I began thinking about this as you're talking about, Sayre, the youth on the team, and Brandon, as you're talking about, D'Angelo Henderson, and I'm just thinking about who he'll be competing with. He'll be competing with Devontae Booker and Royce Freeman, who are both young guys. You've got Troy Fumagalli, you've got Jake Butt, you've got Jeff Hireman. And so other than the quarterback, the offensive line, who still has, they've got a couple rookies there with Garrett Bowles, and they'll be playing probably Connor McGovern. Matt Paradis isn't on a new deal yet. You've probably got, 4 or 5 guys on offense on second contracts, and the rest are all on their first contracts, which is huge for an offense to. I mean, for one, it's easy to see why there wasn't a lot of production out of the offense when there was a lack of leadership. And and I'll be the first to admit, you can go look at one of my pinned tweets. I was all for Denver drafting a quarterback this year. I was all aboard the Baker Mayfield train and wanted them to get, the next generation at quarterback. But when you start looking at it and you start thinking about the fact that there is so much youth on this offense, they needed a veteran for this year and for the next 2 years to really establish that continuity. And so you've got a veteran in Case Keenum, you've got a veteran offensive coordinator in Bill Musgrave, who those guys can work together and really build something and plug all this fresh youth and this fresh blood into the offense, and don't leave them all floundering with a young quarterback. And so
and DT and Emmanuel to lead these new crop of wide receivers. Love it. So,
that's huge, guys. Huge.
And it's what's cool for as a Broncos fan. It was interesting. I put that yards after the catch thing, the top 3 guys after the catch in the Mile High Report chat room. We chat on Slack all the time, and somebody was like, "No, that's too cohesive of a plan for the Broncos." And so like what
right?
Sarcastically, but it's cool as a fan to be sitting here and starting to look at the pieces falling into place and going, okay, like we actually have a plan. Like there's a cohesive plan in place. We're formulating, a strategy on offense, and it's not just this Modge Podge mess that we've seen really since Peyton Manning's last year. Even, there hasn't been an identity, and so to see them beginning to put the pieces together of a coherent offense and a coherent plan is just exciting.
Yeah, that's the word we used to define it too in a podcast or two ago, is identity. So we need to develop what is the Denver Broncos identity. And it's okay if that's a new thing, but it needs to not be something that's inconsistent and changing from week to week. I'm excited for us to have something that, like we talked about, as soon as Bill Musgrave got Case Keenum, he's able to start really just building and figuring out what that identity is going to look like, and then bringing in the pieces and setting us up to where we're finally going into an offense or to an off season where we know our identity. With this quarterback competition last year and in the years before, it's like, well, depending on if it's this guy or if it's this guy, it's going to be a different kind of offense. Well, now we know what our offense is, and now we're just getting everybody in sync with it, and that's exciting.
It really is, and it's exciting to have a quarterback like Case Keenum who's going to be able to think 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. He's gonna understand defenses. He's gonna understand coverages. He's gonna understand tendencies, and not that Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler don't, but Case Keenum has proven that he can exploit those type of things. Over the course of the last season, he proved that he could exploit those things, and that's why I think we're able to legitimately have these discussions about young players stepping up and actually playing roles. Because you could talk last year all you wanted about Carlos Henderson being this impact player. He wasn't going to touch the ball more than 15 times last season based on what we know now, judging by the way that the quarterbacks played and judging by the way that the rookies didn't really get their shot. I mean, it just wasn't going to work out the way that we thought. But now, like you said, with the identity, we have an opportunity as fans to be excited about what is to come for the Denver Broncos.
Well, that's a great point, because I've always held over the last couple of years, it's been impossible to evaluate offensive talent. Like who knows what we have at receiver for any of these guys. You look at the stats from Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, how they just like dropped off a cliff after Peyton Manning left. And so, of course, you're not going to know what you have in any of these young rookie guys. And so it's fun to know that we'll actually be able to see what we have at these skill position players and some of these guys that we're developing.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yep. And as we're talking about building storylines, I'm going to shift into sort of a new topic here. We've talked about the Denver Broncos, but one thing that I know we're all passionate about, and Jeff, I won't reveal the secret that you shared with us. I'll let you do that later if you want to. We're passionate about Star Wars on here, and Jeff maybe more so than any of us could have imagined. I love it. But Brandon, I'm really excited to start dreaming of what the new Star Wars content could be going forward. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on where this franchise is headed, what they're going to be adding to this, to the canon, to all these different things going forward.
Yeah, obviously we've got Solo, which is T minus how many days now? Like about a little more than a week.
Yeah,
a little more than a week.
10
So
days.
next Thursday, it's already premiered in LA, and a lot of people are. There's a lot of really good feedback coming out that it's probably not going to be the best movie of the year, but it's going to be very fun, and it's going to be better than a lot of people expect. So that's exciting. These solo side chapter stories are really cool because you're not seeing a lot of that in the shared universes that are kind of going in a linear fashion from the start to the end. I know Marvel has had Captain America: First Avenger, which broke that a little bit and went back. And Captain Marvel this year is going to be like a 90s period piece. But besides that, it's all like they're all moving forward in a straight line. So it's cool to see a shared universe that's taking advantage of filling in the blanks and going in and patching up these holes and telling stories in these times where, like Rogue One, all we knew was from the crawl of the New Hope that the rebels are kind of coming off this little bit of a victory, and then boom, we expand that into this huge, awesome movie. And I know we've talked about this before. You and I are big fans of Rebels and Clone Wars, and we've got another TV show coming that's Star Wars Resistance, which is taking place in the gap between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, and it's more toward the Force Awakens side of things, and it's going to be an animated anime style, I believe is what they're saying, which is cool. And they're going to bring in Phasma and Poe and some of those characters as at least side characters voiced by their original voice actors. So that's cool. But then recently, this past week, for those who don't know, Jon Favreau, who has been announced that he is doing a Star Wars live action series, he let something slip at the Solo premiere, which is the story he's doing, the live action, takes place 7 years after A New Hope. So it's about like it's I think like 3-4 years after Return of the Jedi. So it's like in that time period, just fresh off Return of the Jedi, a live action Star Wars TV series, and they're going to be using a lot of the CGI tools that they're doing with. He did Jungle Book recently, and he's got Lion King coming out, so a lot of motion capture. And they're going to be just telling a story with new characters. So it's not going to be this like just Luke after Return of the Jedi. They're going to do something really cool with, I think, telling maybe another corner of the universe that's experiencing what's been going on in the post-Empire era after the fall of Vader and Palpatine. So that's all really exciting between Resistance, between this untitled Jon Favreau live action series, and then the potential of an Obi-Wan Kenobi spinoff that's potentially coming down the pipeline.
You guys saw that. It's
awesome.
Like the last couple of days, right? The rumors coming out.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And just being able to see Ewan McGregor naturally aged, playing that character is I think that's gonna be something that, like, it's one thing to get fans on board with a recasted Harrison Ford. That's tough. But when you're talking about seeing like a New Hope Obi-Wan that's Ewan McGregor, that's going to be really cool. And I don't know what approach they're going to take. Is it just like an entirely like Tatooine based story where he's like dealing with the Hutts and the Tusken Raiders and whatnot, or did he get pulled away for a little bit and like kind of bail on Luke to go on some other adventure and then came back, or who knows? It's going to be exciting.
Gosh, I'm so excited about the possibility of that. I mean, because in the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan's character was really expanded upon with his secret love for Duchess Satine. And I was actually thinking about this earlier today, and how his relationship with Anakin Skywalker could have been vastly different had Anakin known that about Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan known about Anakin, his relationship.
If they would have talked about it. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, how different would the Star Wars timeline be if they knew the greatest weakness that you're not supposed to have as a Jedi? They both had it. I mean, they loved someone, and as Obi-Wan said in the Clone Wars, he said, "I would have left the Jedi Order had you said the word." I mean, that's a powerful moment in that show, first of all, but second of all, for the character of Obi-Wan, just to know, because he kind of portrayed himself to be like this really stoic rule follower to Anakin, almost like a big brother whose parents passed away, Qui-Gon, who was taking care of their younger sibling and had to like be this, this hard outer, I have to show you that I'm tough on the exterior. He didn't really reveal a lot about his personal self to Anakin. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the first time that he really said like you're like a brother to me, was when he's staring at Anakin's body, kind of just like burning away. In that last duel that they had together.
You were my brother, Anakin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know if that was the first.
I don't know.
That was the first.
I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, you know, so I mean, it's just had they known
that is a really cool
other.
dynamic as far as you know, for those that don't know, in the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had been sent on a mission to Mandalore back before Episode 1, and they had spent some time and developed some relationships, and Obi-Wan struck up a friendship with one of the young rulers of Mandalore, Duchess Satine, and then in the Clone Wars conflict, they were brought back there to Mandalore. It was a chess piece in the midst of this battle between Separatists and Republic, but Mandalore wanted to remain neutral. They were going through their own problems, but they were always brought into the conflict, and the Jedi would never allow too much resources. The Republic would never allow too much resources to go to Mandalore to help in their conflicts because of their neutrality. So Obi-Wan would often put himself in the midst of those conflicts for his emotional reasons and his attachments to Duchess Satine. And it comes down to a point to where, he gets faced with Darth Maul, and Darth Maul extracts revenge upon Obi-Wan using Duchess Satine, and it's really a heartbreaking, very emotionally poignant, powerful scene and powerful moment in Obi-Wan's storyline. And to see almost like maybe some of those regrets play out, I would love a lot of that in Kenobi. I would love to see him very much trying to figure out and reflect upon the failures in a similar way to like what Luke was going through. But I think for Luke, it's all kind of secondhand, you know, what happened to the Jedi, where Obi-Wan was there firsthand. And it was his direct failures, largely, whether it's some of those things like not having the conversation about love with Anakin, or just really like if Qui-Gon would have been Anakin's master, Anakin would never have turned to the dark side. That's
right.
Just absolutely true. Like Qui-Gon knew when to bend the rules. He was going to train Anakin whether the Jedi Council allowed him to or not. He fluctuated a lot more in that gray area, and Anakin didn't need a very rigid master that wasn't adapting to the specifics of who Anakin was. He was somebody that was, as the chosen one, was going to do what other Jedi couldn't do. So you needed to kind of play a different role than typical master. And I think Obi-Wan tried. I think he had good intentions, but if Qui-Gon would have been Anakin's master, that probably would never have happened. And for him to have to think about that in these reflection years about like, where did I go wrong? And maybe I was too rigid. Maybe the council was too rigid. And how do you apply that to protecting Luke and potentially safeguarding this only hope for the galaxy is exciting.
Gosh, it really is. It really is. Jeff,
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Jeff.
That's a lot of deep stuff right there. Digging in. That's good. One of the things I think, tagging onto that conversation, one of the things about Obi-Wan, I think, is you bring up the fact that, you know, Qui-Gon was this kind of rule breaking guy that died early on in Kenobi's story, and so he's very young taking on a Padawan, which he shouldn't have been doing probably, and so it almost feels like he's overcompensating in terms of following the rules because he knows himself has a tendency, like he knows that he has a tendency to stray from the rules, and so it almost feels like a do as I say, not as I do overcompensation, and it felt like Anakin could pick up on that because you see Obi-Wan Kenobi bending the rules in the, you know, at strategic points in not only a Clone Wars show but also in the Clone Wars, the actual live action movies. At a couple different points as well. And then, you know, obviously the whole storyline with Duchess Satine. And so you have Kenobi internalizing that. And I'm sure in his mind, he's going through things of, you know, oh, I'm not enough of a Jedi. I've done, you know, all of these things. I'm too young, all of this stuff going on internally. So it almost feels like he's overcompensating and pushing even harder on Anakin to make him something that he isn't, or that he never could be. And it ends up, you know, he ends up, you know, repeating the same mistakes as Obi-Wan almost. And so it's interesting how that plays out. It's that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. A bit.
That's really cool.
Scooting back to some of the things you mentioned at the very beginning, I'm super excited to see what they do with the Resistance series, and I would love for them to not do like. It could be very easy now that Disney has it and they're trying to churn out everything and make a lot of money off of it. It could be very easy to make it almost a clone of the Star Wars Rebels show, similar to how The Force Awakens was almost a bit of a New Hope, a bit of a replay of the New Hope. And so I'm really excited to see what they do with that, and I hope they go in kind of a fresh new direction. Because one of the things that's interesting that's so far, it feels like, and you guys weigh in on this, see if you agree, disagree. I've been kind of working through this. It feels like the Star Wars universe is so vast and like there's so much potential, and I wish they would explore so many different areas, but it feels like they're almost hobbled or crippled a little bit by the strength of their own original characters. And so when you look at The Force Awakens, they tried to pay homage to the old group, which I love the fact that they did that, because they had to get the new fans on board, had to reboot it. But those characters ended up being the star of the show, and they try to launch these new characters, and they did. And I feel like Rey is probably the closest to that, to like on that level of the old characters in terms of being, that level of iconic and that relatable and that popular. But some of their new characters, especially, I felt like in The Last Jedi, they weren't at a place where they could stand on their own. And I was in a place where I was just wishing for Luke some more, or I was wishing for more of Han Solo back in Force Awakens, or I was wishing, for more of Leia. And so it almost feels like they're kind of crippled by the fact that the characters from the originals were so strong, and the fact that they decided to keep that connection so woven into the new story that they haven't been able to really launch a new characters or a new world, because they're kind of stuck in this timeline. And so that in Kenobi and Solo would be incredible to see them kind of uncover some of that, but it's still stuck in that already created character timeline. And I
think that the possibility of Jon Favreau's series, of him emphasizing new characters, and even the fact that Rian Johnson's going to be doing a new trilogy that's in a different corner, in a different space. And then you've got the this is something that hasn't been talked about too much, that's kind of forgotten about, is as soon as the Game of Thrones showrunners, the two head writers of Game of Thrones, are done with Game of Thrones, this final season, they're switching tracks to developing Star Wars universe that takes place in the past, I believe, before episode 1.
Some old Republic stuff. I mean,
so maybe we're going to get that between those three, is them finally, like, I think you kind of hit it as far as with Force Awakens, you kind of had to do some of that, where you got to get the old generation on board. You also got to cleanse the palate of the prequels for those that didn't like it, which, agree or disagree, perception of Star Wars was lowered by the prequels in the mainstream fans. So you had to kind of shake that off, and you had to kind of give them like this weird balance of like familiarity and then also originality, which I think that Last Jedi started to kind of pull away from a bit. And so now if you fully embrace these series, whether it's Favreau's live action or, the Game of Thrones guys, or Rian Johnson's future trilogy, you're going to start to get where, like, let's anchor the story from the beginning away from nostalgia. And then let's alternate that with the solo movies of like Obi-Wan. So you get a good balance of nostalgia with new. And I think that's what fans are really hungering for.
Yep, I agree with that. And I think for me, I'm almost becoming attached to some of the new characters that I hadn't known anything about prior to watching Rebels or watching the Clone Wars, specifically Ahsoka. Ahsoka is like the character that I just can't get out of my head. Like I read the book. Like I'm all about Ahsoka's story, and I'm really interested to see if they weave her into any of the theatrical films, which I don't know if they will do that or not. But I think the Kenobi film, if that comes to fruition, would be a great opportunity, because obviously Obi-Wan is not the only Force wielder in the universe. We know Yoda's out there. We know Ahsoka's out there, and we know that Obi-Wan knows Ahsoka very well. And so, and Ahsoka's obviously really connected to Anakin, and, by, 7 degrees of separation to Luke as well. And so I'm kind of excited to see if they intertwine her story with Obi-Wan's in any way, because she also has a number of run-ins with Maul. And so, I don't know, there's just a lot of things that kind of come together about those two stories that I would be really pumped to see them expand more on Ahsoka's story. Even though they have the book, they have Rebels, we have Clone Wars, we have all this stuff about her already. I mean, it would be cool to see her be a little bit more featured.
Yeah, I think there's two things I would really like to see. I think that would be awesome. Depending on when the Kenobi story takes place, what Ahsoka we'd see, because he was a little older. By the time we saw Ahsoka depart Rebels, Obi-Wan was already pretty old and probably older than the version that they're going to go with Ewan McGregor. But one thing I got excited about when it was confirmed that she's alive beyond episode 6, right, was what if, remember when Luke says the line to Rey about Darth Sidious? He specifically says Darth Sidious. Well, wait a minute. He knew him as Palpatine. So what information did Luke acquire during that gap of time to where he would tell the story to Rey and address him as Darth Sidious? And one of the things I thought would be awesome after the Rebels finale is, could you imagine if Ahsoka goes and finds Luke and tells him the story of what happened to his dad and gives him insight and perspective on where the Empire went wrong, and maybe some of Luke's beliefs of the Jedi Order even needing to go beyond his own failures, some of that's rooted in maybe some of the stories that Ahsoka told him about what had happened.
Which would make the storyline in The Last Jedi so much more rich, because I loved Luke's new ethic almost in his, almost the cleansing of the Jedi Order, and the way he talked about how they went wrong, and him, not wanting to repeat those mistakes with Kylo. And so it would just give make that backstory that much more rich. I love that.
Absolutely. And the Jedi Order does need to be cleansed. And I'm a huge fan of that they failed Anakin. They absolutely failed. They had got so rigid and so dogmatic that the Force allowed them to be destroyed. And Palpatine was the vessel, and they went through a dark period after that. But even to the point where you come to Return of the Jedi, Yoda and Obi-Wan still hadn't learned from their mistakes, to where they're telling Luke the only way you can fulfill your destiny is if you go kill Darth Vader, which was so not true. And so it's even at that point, they still hadn't learned. It was Padme believing in that there was still good in him, and Luke that believed that my father's not gone. So there was almost this compassion, love element that the Jedi had lost that they needed to return to, and some element of mercy. And I think that Rey is in the perfect position now, moving the Star Wars universe forward and the Jedi Order forward, to bring them back to the truth of what the Jedi really needs to be. And I saw something recently, by the way, about, wouldn't it be cool if one of the books that Rey has, the ancient Jedi texts, what if one of those is Obi-Wan's journal? Because there's a comic storyline where Obi-Wan has been writing this journal for Luke, and Luke actually ended up going and recovering it and finding it. So that would be really cool if one of those books on the shelf happened to be Obi-Wan's journal, and that's now in Rey's possession. That would be rad.
That would be sweet. Well, I know we talked pre-show that we could go on with Star Wars all for an entire episode, and maybe, maybe we have, that's fine. But Jeff, I'm really excited that you joined us for this. This was a blast. I mean, I love the stuff that you're bringing to the table, just with your writing, being on this podcast, and wherever we can find your material, man. I mean, it's just excellent. It's just high quality always. So, where can people follow you on your social media accounts?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jeffrey Essary. Essary, just at Jeffrey Essary is my name. And then, look for me on Mile High Report, writing there all the time and putting out new content. So Twitter account, and then check us out at Mile High Report as well. And I want to thank you guys for having me on. And it's an honor to be the first guest on the podcast. And It's been a blast. I really appreciate it, guys. This has been so much fun. And so
as we get closer to the season and, maybe mid-season, something like that, we're going to have you back on, and we'll have to retrace our steps and see if we nailed anything in this podcast.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll do an accountability podcast. Well, guys, for Jeff, for Brandon, myself, we're so thankful that you've been listening. Look forward to having a few more episodes here in the near future, talking we're still excited to talk about Tim Tebow. I know Brandon and I have been talking about that. So the
Tebow episode's coming, baby. It's coming.
It's coming. It is coming. All right. Well, Thank you all for listening. We love you so much. Brandon, sign us off.
God bless and go Broncos.